Nothing added up. Chiaki knew the other 4 had been together all night, and she knew Naegi-kun wasn't the type to kill anyone. The most suspicious person was Kirigiri-san, but she didn't think the lavender-haired woman had done it either. She spent a lot of time off on her own, but she'd been so helpful in the trials. And then she made that point about how she wouldn't be able to return to her room to get the locker key.
I can't figure it out.
She griped.
Nothing's making sense. Naegi-kun should be the only one who could have done it, but it's Naegi-kun.
Naegi Makoto did not kill Ikusaba Mukuro. She started. It was the first time Kamakura-kun had spoke since discovering the body. That dark look still hadn't left his eyes. Neither did Kirigiri Kyoko, nor the other 4. At first, she just felt relief because none of them would get executed. Then confusion.
Then, how did she die? Was it suicide?
Her breath caught, and she snapped her gaze back to the screen where the students were voting.
No, that's not important. If none of them killed her, and they vote anyway, then...
Well done, everyone! Monokuma praised as the votes came in, and Naegi-kun was declared the culprit. You were correct once again!
Huh?
Naegi-kun looked just as shocked as she felt. His eyes were the size of dinner plates, and a trembling finger pointed at his chest in disbelief, a wide-eyed, "Me?" She is framing him. Kamakura-kun answered her unspoken question. If Tone could kill, the thinly veiled venom in his would have struck Monokuma dead. She is breaking her rules and framing him. She's ruined the game. Chiaki could have screamed at him. Who cared about the game? Naegi-kun was going to... The collar clasped around his neck, and he was dragged into a classroom and slammed into a chair. The camera pulled back to show them the setup, and Chiaki's vision grew blurry. He was on a conveyor belt, facing away from a massive slab of metal. Every few seconds it came crashing down. After letting them soak that in, Enoshima zoomed in back to Naegi-kun's face, treating them to a close-up of his terror-filled green eyes. Usually, this was the part where Chiaki looked away, but she couldn't.
Kamaeda-kun's luck saved him. Kamakura-kun's luck saved him. So then his should too. It has to. It has to.
As the conveyor belt carried him to his destination, Naegi-kun's face slowly drained of color. His small body shook, helpless to only listen to the sound of his death approaching. The tears on her eyes started to spill over. It was right behind him now, so close the vibrations were making his body jolt slightly. Naegi-kun passed under the block. Chiaki moaned and pressed her face into her hands. Except, the sound of him being crushed into bloody chunks never came. A metallic groan reached her ears instead. Peeking through her fingers, she saw a girlish, determined face flash on the monitor, the shock on Monokuma's, and the block stalling.
Fujisaki-kun? No, wait. Alter ego?
The conveyor belt had not stopped moving. Naegi-kun was carried past the block and... disappeared. Falling down a chute of some sort? It didn't matter. His luck had saved him. Air rushed shakily out of her mouth, and tears filled her eyes again, this time of relief.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Oh, I hope they've grinded it enough.
She fretted, watching Class 78 investigate the school. Enoshima had been determined to make her audience believe Naegi-kun was gone. The broadcast the day after hadn't shown him at all, but followed the other 5 as they fruitlessly searched for anything new. But she'd seen Kirigiri-san slipping off on her own, and hope had flared bright in her chest. Hope that proved true when the very next day she returned, Naegi-kun in tow. And now it was time for them to win and escape. They must be high level by now, after all the trials they'd done. This wasn't going to be like her and her classmates rushing in unprepared. They'd already gone up against Enoshima via Monokuma several times and triumphed. This would be no different. It had to be. Of course, Enoshima didn't play fair. She tried to trick them with photos, laying false trails and implications to turn them on each other. But despite her best efforts, the class hounded and harried her, until Naegi-kun tied all the evidence together in a neat little bow and declared Enoshima Junko the mastermind and the murderer of Ikusaba Mukuro. Stabbing his finger at Monokuma, he finished up his statement with a tone of finality. How about it? This is the whole truth about this case! Monokuma went completely silent, not even responding to the students' taunts. With his slumped shoulders, he almost looked defeated, a notion that was quickly proven false when he slowly raised his head, a chilly tone entering his voice. Over? Boo! He began to laugh. Did you really think it would be over with that climax? You're wrong! There's still so much to do! His red eye gleamed brightly, and then smoke billowed out of the vents, obscuring the entire courtroom. Naegi-kun and the other students recoiled, coughing, and when it cleared, there she was, hands on hips and chin lifted proudly. Enoshima Junko, ultimate despair and orchestrator of the tragedy. The sight of her painted Chiaki's vision red, and something curdled black and heavy and sour in her stomach.
I wish Komaeda-kun had shot you,
she thought vehemently. It was awful to wish one of her friends had killed someone, but she did. She wished with her whole being that the ultimate lucky student had just shot Enoshima on the spot. So much would have been prevented if he'd just pulled the trigger. She hated Enoshima, and that hate only grew as Enoshima revealed that Ikusaba had been her twin sister, killed on nothing more than a whim. As she rattled on about how much despair she'd felt at her sister's death, and how stimulating that despair was, and how jealous she was of Ikusaba for experiencing the despair of betrayal.
She did all this. Destroyed the world. Had her classmates, her friends kill each other. Murdered her own sister. Because it felt good? Unforgivable.
Chiaki hissed.
It's absolutely unforgivable.
Not content with just using her words to break their spirits, Enoshima pulled up footage of the outside world. The riots, the desecrated monuments, the ultimate despairs. The red sky and the fires burned bright. By the end of it, the color had completely drained from the students' faces. And then, with a broad, gleeful grin, Enoshima broke them down with a simple ultimatum. Sacrifice Naegi-kun and live in safety forever, or kill her and be forced into the outside world. Class 78 visibly shrank, curling up and suffocating under the weight of her words. Even Chiaki was feeling crushed, and she knew things weren't nearly as bad as the ultimate despair was pretending. And then... Don't lose hope!